Hey everyone, welcome to No Person Names Review Crew. This is episode 43, and I'll be your host today, Kevin Gossett, the LA Reviews editor for No Proscenium. Today we have...
Hey everyone, it's Patrick McLean, the Chicago curator.
This is Kathryn Yu, executive editor of No Proscenium.
So today we've got an episode where I don't know much about what's going on in the VR, the VR space. So I know that's what we want to talk about. So you have some games you're that are coming out soon that I think you're trying to figure out whether you're excited about. Are they interesting? And I don't want to monopolize discussion as someone that doesn't know what the hell is going on in the VR space, but maybe you kind of walk me through maybe it's worth picking up a quest for some of these games. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. A big part of it is that maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, Meta, Facebook, whatever you want to call them at this point, had their gaming showcase of and I'm sure many people are out there are well aware. It's basically the equivalent of E3 or other video game or computer based conferences where they just release a bunch of stuff. They tease, they're like, this is what's coming, this is what's going to be happening. And they did that with VR in regards to all the offerings that Quest has. And as we've kind of talked about, once again, for better or worse, Meta/Facebook, they have the best VR headset available for the general public consumers. And so with that, I think with this recent announcement of games, they've got a big push into, I think, some pretty big brand names and things in regards to what they're trying to offer. But a few of them are also sequels to a couple classics that we do enjoy. I know Kathryn is, maybe I got this wrong, but you're a fan of the first thing that they kind of teased that we've got in the notes, right?
Yeah, so they are doing Moss Book 2, which is a sequel to Moss, and I think it's a really interesting format for a VR game because like some other console and PC games, you are controlling a character who is this adorable little mouse named Quill. And so you've got Quill, and it's kind of got this platformer, 3D platformer feel with some puzzles. But you, as the player, are also present in the game as this kind of ghostly figure. And your hands are these glowing orbs. And so you can not only control Quill, but you're kind of Quill's companion character. And so, as this ghostly figure who is human scale in VR, Quill is this itty bitty mouse, and sometimes she needs help leaping over gaps or crossing bridges or opening doors. And so you, as the human scale ghost, can actually manipulate the world to help Quill along. So there's these spatially oriented puzzles because it is a platformer, and then there's combat elements, and it's happening in this kind of fantastical forest, a very classic storybook world. And so I have a soft spot for Polyarc Games and what they've done with Moss in the past. So I personally am looking forward to it because I think this is just a really interesting format that lends itself well to VR. And one of the things that really struck me about playing Moss 1 was not even just moving forward with the game, but just enjoying the forest environment and looking at some of the environments and puzzles and almost set pieces from multiple angles. So yeah, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, because they definitely use perspective in regards to the platforming. I think that's what makes Moss kind of it's an older game, but I think that's what made it stand out for so long, and one that people kept holding up. So it's exciting to see where they go next with this sequel.
I don't know if it's been too long, but how does the platforming elements work in VR? Because that seems like it could be a little dicey.
It can be. It's sometimes it's a matter of being able to manipulate the world and spin around it. It's so many other people. It changes because there's Down the Rabbit Hole, which is an Alice in Wonderland experience where you're literally going further and further down the hole, but you're you're in this, it's like a circular space. So you can look around and you got to kind of peer through different levels and things like that. But then you can see how far you've gone down, where then there's also the Curious Secret Lives of Pets. I'm screwing it up, but basically there's this kind of floating island which you can grab and rotate to see if you can try to spot the pets. So everyone does it very differently in regards to kind of the perspective. And I think what Moss does really well is that it makes that a sprawling. Like I feel like so much like when you're playing like let's say Mario and he's running along one way or the other, you just get that tiny squares worth, where with Moss and some these other games you can really see like up and down the whole platforming experience, or look at it from the opposite angle and maybe discover that's the solution.
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, it sounds like it has like that puzzle element that Kathryn was talking about too. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, more tactically, you've got like this thumbstick joystick. And so you would like use that to move your character around. But then when you move your actual hands around in space, they're still your hands. So you get like a little bit of like the best of both worlds that way.
Nice. All right, Patrick, I think you got the next show.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the two bigger announcements that came out of the gaming showcase for Meta. And this was Ghostbusters VR, which is from Sony Pictures, Virtual Reality, and Ghost Core, and the creators of the Ghostbuster franchise in general. And what was very interesting is that this was more of a promise of what's going to be coming. This was one of these more theatrically produced trailers. I believe it even had the note of like, this is not actual game footage. This is just us trying to showcase what it is and what hopefully will be. And it's heavily implies that you and 3 other friends will be wandering around. You know, it looked like a basement for right now in the trailer that they presented, but then you're going to be capturing ghosts and you're going to be using your proton packs and trying to probably ultimately catch Slimer. I mean, like, to not include Slimer in this game seems like a really dumb idea. So I presume he'll be showing up along with other of those iconic guests. Now, that's really all we know. Like, we don't know, is it like a multiplayer campaign, or is it just simply like a drop in, have like you're in a mini map and you're doing objectives? But it's a pretty big thing for sure. And I think it's a continuation of trying to get like name brand recognition into a lot of these VR games.
But we don't know like which Ghostbusters, who you are. Like, are you playing any of the iconic characters, either from the original or from the reboot? Like, we still don't know any of that.
Well, and then in the trailer, I saw of the other 3 players, because the trailer is shot from the perspective of like a player like walking around and they're seeing things. And the 3 other, profiles and images we saw, like I didn't see any recognizable cast member from any of the Ghostbuster movies. So whether that also means maybe you can customize your Ghostbuster, right? Like the more you play like that, you get cosmetic perks and things and stuff like that. But it's also like, I think it's worth noting is I think what VR can do really well is have communal experiences. And I think, like so much, there are plenty of games where people can just do something by themselves, but there's so few that you can do something collectively well and efficiently. And that's the hope I have for Ghostbusters in regards to what's coming.
And that one has like a built-in, like camaraderie aspect in terms of how the Ghostbusters work too. So I think maybe that does sound interesting to me. But someone without a headset and can't even play it. Like, oh, maybe I would check out that one. Kathryn, you have the next one, which is also maybe a familiar name, but not in the same way that Ghostbusters is.
Right. So while the upcoming Ghostbusters VR title is cooperative, Among Us VR is, I think, the opposite of a cooperative. So it is taking the very, very popular kind of twist on werewolf/mafia, that 2D game that was extremely popular around 2020 and even into 2021. Created by Innersloth, and they are partnering with a name that should be familiar to VR heads, Schell Games, who did I Expect You to Die 1, I Expect You to Die 2, Until You Fall, as well as Robot Teddy. And this is coming out in holiday 2022 is what they promised, but it is essentially a 3-dimensional virtual reality actualization of the Among Us game, in which a group of players are all tasked with various problems that need to be solved on a really terrible spaceship. Meanwhile, one of them is the killer silently kills one of them, and then it turns into, Jacques Hughes. It was I was in the control room. Where were you? Oh, you were in the comms room. No, I was taking up. No, Patrick did it. No, wait, it was Kevin, and all of
Yeah.
that kind of wonderful stuff that happens in a social deduction game. So super looking forward to this. Although I do have to say that I tend to die really quickly in 2D Among Us. So not really looking forward to dying in VR or being ejected in the. So one of the like classic things they do is once you accuse someone of being the murderer, you eject them into space. And so if you're unlucky like me, you either die really fast or you get accused really fast. And of course, you're not the murderer, so you just get ejected into space. And that's, not the best thing, but that's that's how a game of werewolf or mafia or whatnot works anyway.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see how they adapt this game to the VR space, because I think to that point, if you do die early or if you are ejected and we're not the killer, you can come back in Among Us as like a little in the primary game. In the original, you come back as a ghost and you can just wander around and help with activities, or you can just haunt your killer just because you're just so angry and frustrated. And then the other thing is that when you are you do bump into the killer and that they do kill you, there's this kind of like different animations that like flash very quickly and things like that, and sometimes they're very different, and there's different versions of them. So it'll be interesting to see how those two components play out when it's in the three-dimensional rendered space. I'll be curious to see, like, do you just drop out of the game instantly? Like, because that's
Well,
what I said. It's like it's busy work sometimes. Like if you die, you're just kind of like, all right, I'm just gonna hit these buttons and just help out. And lucky the people who got to live.
and even just how it plays, right? Because it's in like a top down, so you can kind of see what's going on around you. But if you're in VR, like you're only gonna be able to see like kind of what's in front of you unless you're like heads on a swivel, right?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, so like I
Don't turn
that's
around.
yeah, that's the thing. That's like I think that's the exciting part of this with adapting it to VR is the tension that like being mindful of 360s, like looking over your shoulder and like trying to see, is someone behind me? I'll be curious to think how sound works. Do you think maybe they'll have like, you'll be able to hear people's footsteps like on the metal floor? I imagine when I look at that game, I feel like it's all like metal and stuff in the hallway. So it'll be curious to see how they communicate people, how
like
other people are interacting in the world. Yeah. Yeah.
Sneaking up on me. Patrick, you have the last one, which I don't know anything about. So I'm just gonna let you talk about it.
Yeah, this is one that I'm excited about, and then kind of we'll get into here shortly. I'm a little bummed about. So they're coming out with a sequel to Red Matter 2 by Vertical Robot, and I know Kathryn, I think, very much enjoys this game with me. So this is essentially in a alternate timeline where the Cold War went on for much longer and the world was reshaped because of it, and the aesthetics of that Soviet era still persist and are involved. And there's been a race to colonize the stars, and they've made it to Mars in regards to the Russians have, and they seem to have a really strong foothold. And in the original, you are going in there to try to figure out what's going on and solve the mystery of what happened to the previous people on the planet. And it quickly becomes this long form puzzler that is deeply psychological and has you beginning to question what is real and what isn't. And it has a pretty trippy ending. I think the last third of it, I'm still constantly thinking about in regards to what it was trying to tell me and what it was doing. So it'll be very intriguing to see why we're returning to this world.
I agree.
In regards to it. Yeah.
I feel like the story, the explanation for the events that occurred, because very early on, as you're exploring this abandoned moon station on Saturn, the Volgravians, like you're an astronaut, you've got a mission. I think you're trying to get some sort of intelligence, and then you start to see, how would you even describe it? Not algae, but like a fungus has like taken over the station.
Like
And
a
so
goop, like I imagine it like it's a reddish version of what the aliens in Alien like kind of end up covering ships in and things like that. It's just like kind of snot based. Like,
oh yeah, it's super creepy, and then you
yeah,
start seeing things that aren't actually there in the story world, and just they had a whole explanation for why this was all happening when you got to the end of the game, and I was like, oh, this is a very wonderful, self-contained, makes sense. I like the internal
hmm
logic was solid, and now there's a sequel, and I'm kind of like, oh, but the original felt like it was very well encapsulated, like it did tie up a lot of those loose ends.
yeah. And I think the other big part of it was it did tone amazingly well. Like I talked about this with Wraith, the VR horror game last year, and that's the underground station base that you're in Red Matter. It just has a life of its own and a personality. And spoiler alert, you really don't encounter anyone in that game, but there's just like this uneasiness in how the world functions and lives and exists. Um, and I think that adds a lot to that experience. And one of the things featured in Red Matter 2, actually two things, is that there seems to now you be able to see people, like in regards to like in the opening, there's like a cutscene with like someone speaking over a radio and you can see their face. It's a digital face. It's not like live captured video. And then also there's like robots now that you're like shooting at and things and stuff like that. So like I I'm excited, but I'm very worried that everything I loved in Red Matter 2 is going away. And it's just maybe the title of this game is what's being carried over.
Yes, possible. You could always like spin it as a sequel, but not literally call it Red Matter 2. It could be like Agent Epsilon something something.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, we found another secret base and you're just on the other side of the planet, like that kind of a thing. Like,
But you're not alone anymore, right? Like the whole
right.
thing that made it so creepy was that the base was abandoned. You were getting
Yes.
radio communications from like your captain or general or whatever, and then because it was supposed to be abandoned, why did you see this weird figure? Where did that
Well,
other
did you?
astronaut?
You weren't even sure at
Right,
first,
it's
maybe.
gone now. Like all
Yeah.
that vibe, the creepy thriller is gone, I guess.
Yeah. No. And it's like it's only like a 90-second trailer. We don't really see a lot other than like, hey, we're back and we've included more stuff into this world for better or worse that's now new. And like The Room, like Wraith, and like maybe the conversation we'll be having is just that I think it's becoming more of a video game rather than an immersive narrative experience that simply has some video game elements in it.
Right. Like if you look on the Quest store, you'll see certain experiences are tagged as interactive stories and less about maybe the action adventure stuff that tends to be on like the front page.
Or buried, or if just happens to be the deal of the day. That's usually what happens. Because there's one other here, one really very quickly, because they recently, like within the last like week or so, like announced a game that I think you and I are very excited about because I saw this and I'm like, I want more of this. And it's called The Last Clockwinder. And it seems to be a puzzle automation game where you are in one space that is changing around you as you kind of solve the mystery of a family who has been taking care of some magical fruit in this tree to keep the world growing. Uh, does that sound like what you watched, Kathryn, in the trailer?
I think I was just hypnotized by these looping automatons that you could build, and then all of a sudden you could start thinking of like these Rube Goldberg like mechanics and just the potential for the types of puzzles that you can make with, winding clocks and gears and loops as a metaphor just seemed really rich to me. So I don't think I paid as much attention to the story so much as, wow, they're actually trying to like gamify this type of mechanic.
Yeah, like because it seems that like the order in which maybe you're having these little droids do things that like ultimately maybe will get the engine going and solve a puzzle or something is really intriguing to like because it sure seemed like it consisted of like, you program one robot to toss something, you program the other robot to catch it, who then hands it to a third robot who then dunks it into the machine. Like the integral timing of it seems so intriguing and original and super exciting. And it's like, why wasn't that maybe one of the games included in the gaming conference? Maybe it wasn't ready. We don't know. We weren't there. We're not involved. We're not making these decisions. But I'm like, that should have been that. I wish that was a headliner game for me. Show more of that on the homepage, please.
Yeah. And just super interesting to note that the publisher of the game is Cyan Ventures, who you all might know better as the creators of Myst. So Cyan Worlds now has this publishing arm, and not only are they publishing Last Clockwinder, but they also published a game that I think we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes here.
Yeah. Do we want to just talk about it?
Well, I feel like you had this amazing segue planned, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because I think that's the big thing is that, like, I think the Last Clockwinder addresses that, is that it's been very interesting to watch the VR space, even these last couple of years, and how quickly it has gone to action adventure, first person shooting games so quickly, and in dominating the field as that's the only options. I feel like just maybe 5 years ago on the Quest, like it was just like Vader Immortal and some other kind of more walking narrative type things that maybe like had some like arm swinging and stuff like that. But there was always so much emphasis on world or story or characters or something very unique, rather than all the stuff you could get from a video game that you could play on a console or on your computer or even on your phone nowadays. And I feel like we've really drifted away from that. And I think that's something I think, Kathryn, you have a similar interest in. Most of the staff at No Proscenium does. And I presume all the good folks out there listening, those are the things when they put on the headset, they want to experience more. So we wanted to highlight some new stuff that we've been playing that's come out that might be flying under the radar, or you might not be seeing it because it's not the banner thing in the Meta store when you click on the app to maybe peruse and buy something new.
And just from the perspective of someone without a VR headset who's like always kind of considering buying one, stuff like Moss Book 2 seems like what I'd be more interested in, like playing on a VR space than a shooter, which I play a lot of like Destiny 2 right now. So it's like, I'm not opposed to shooters, but it's like those feel better on a console or like a mouse and keyboard than it might on a VR. And it sounds like Moss uses like the perspective that you can only get maybe in VR to include in the puzzles and the way the game plays out, rather than just like, oh, I played a shooter before. There's a million of those in consoles, right?
But Kevin, don't you want to have like all of your, your stuff around your belt, and then have to like actually reach down and pick up the gun and then realize it's not loaded, and then you have to find where the bullets are on your body. Meanwhile, you're dying and your screen's turning red in your face. That's so much fun, right?
Yeah, what a great time.
You know, you say that, and then like, but if that was actually like an in-person immersive experience, maybe it would be fun that way.
Yeah, I think my bugaboo, I guess, is I drop stuff in VR all the time, and every time I have to like pick something off the digital floor, I'm like, God damn it, not again. Why can't
I let it go? Well, and then even it's funny, I have a friend who's really big into Warhammer, and he was like, let's get the Warhammer game because then we could do it together and stuff. I'm like, all right, fine, I'll do it. And I couldn't get the ammo cartridge into the gun. I kept missing the spatial thing. It's like I was the worst. I'm the worst soldier ever, apparently. If it came to the heat of the moment, I'm just like, and I'm just dying because I can't load a fake gun because I'm holding two controller things in my palms that have circles on them, and you're like banging them together in reality, trying to like line everything up in the virtual world. Yeah, it's a delightful time. 5 stars.
Load again with like oven mitts on, I guess.
It's worse than oven mitts because like injuring your other injuring one of your hands with the other hand because the controllers are crashing together, you just feel so dumb.
Yeah, like it Yeah, it's like by your bicycle first bicycle ride in a way. It's like I should be aware of things and stuff like that, you know?
Anyway, let's talk about some games that
Anyways.
rely on other kinds of mechanics. Patrick, so you and I have both tried a little bit of Area Man Lives. I've gotten about like an hour into it. I don't know how far you got.
I've gotten much further, which I think is actually maybe going to
Ah.
change the perspective of this game. So this is Area Man Lives by Numerous Games.
Numinous.
Numinous, thank you. And so basically the summation of this is that you are a radio DJ in a small Oregon town where you're spinning the records, and it's kind of a, low gig. Maybe their listenership is not all that much, and you've got to keep things going. And, you're doing commercials, you're taking callers on the air, and you're trying to piece things together. But what quickly happens is that there is an area man who believes you are sending him like instructions on what to do tonight. That by playing certain records or certain ads, you are trying to you're trying to alert him to divert an impending disaster that could be around the corner. And from there, even things get wackier and spookier and goofier and nuttier all at the same time in every possible direction as things unfold. But you yourself never leave the recording studio while there's all these characters who are having narrative experiences around you unseen. You only get voices. There's no people as of yet through my playthrough, and you are influencing lives and things like that from the comfort of your little DJ booth in a really kind of fascinating way.
Yeah, I would compare it to Firewatch in that you're interacting with characters, but they're never visible to you. So you might hear someone pounding on the door. You might talk to someone over the phone. I think the station manager speaks to you like over a speaker.
Yes.
And the art style is very comic book-esque, and all of the dialogue is subtitled on the various surfaces of the station, and it's using comic book lettering. And there is a lot of dialogue in this game.
Well, I will say that was actually something I thought really was nice in regards to accessibility, because if basically it's a four-walled room, and depending on where you're looking, the text will always be present somewhere, which I thought was really nice. That like in case, like I feel like there's a lot of games where they just maybe put it at the bottom of the screen or it's in one place. I thought maybe for those who have trouble hearing things in regards to games, they could like look and see, they could always see the text. And I actually thought that was ultimately helpful for some of the puzzles for me, because I was able to like see the word, and I'm like, oh, that's what you're trying to clue me into.
Yeah, and there's sometimes like double talk, like the station manager is talking to you while someone on the phone is also talking to you. And so I was like, oh, I can like read what they're saying. So it took something that could be overwhelming into something that was like actually digestible.
And so you mentioned the puzzles, but is this more comedy? Is this more drama? Like I watched the trailer, which is my sole contribution to this conversation. And it seemed like it had like a kind of a comedy bent to it. And I guess part of that is also the people involved on the voice cast, which includes Max Greenfield from New Girl, Joel McHale of Community, and then Ronan Farrow, who was like a real question mark in that one.
Right. A journalist playing a journalist. And yes, the thing, it's like a little spooky, a little surreal. Like it has a lot of the hallmarks of like, oh, this could go terribly wrong because there's a storm and the power goes out. And yet Max Greenfield's character is literally called Area Man, because when he talks, it says like Area Man and then what he's actually saying.
Well, and then, so I think, Kathryn, you called this out as a comparison if it's Firewatch. So I would say it's Firewatch meets the lighter, funner elements of Twin Peaks in regards to like the tone that it's trying to set. Because let's get into it a little bit. So, Area Man believes the disaster is coming, but doesn't know what, and is on a quest to solve it. And you can guide the area man through the town by playing certain records or ads. Like basically, if you put in an ad for the local Mexican restaurant when he's at an intersection, and that's one of the two places he could go, because it's usually like a option 1, option 2 kind of branching narrative. By playing the ad for the Mexican restaurant, that's the direction area man will take to try to go there. And then both typically what happens is, while on the way to the location, there's some kind of obstacle. And then in getting there, there's some kind of obstacle that requires you, the DJ's help. And that's where then I think the fun thing with Area Man Lives comes in, because if you're not quick enough, or you maybe fail to do the challenge correctly that arises, the Area Man dies. And then what happens is that the news reporter, played by Ronan Farrow, gives a summary of like the bizarre way that they died. And then, of course, naturally, what you find out is like the area man was revealed to be a private consultant to the last 8 Nobel Prize laureates, in being very helpful in making sure world peace is occurring, right? Like the area man always turns out to have like secretly be involved in something else. And then the other big part of it is that like they're goofy challenges. At one point for me, I'm driving along and that satellites start dropping out of the sky suddenly and randomly for some bizarre reason.
Wait, did we get into spoiler territory? I think we did.
Well, it's one of the many paths. And I guess, so yeah, spoiler, we're going to get into a few of these games. So thank you for listening. Sorry, I didn't throw that up there. So here's the thing. I guess, Kathryn, in your hour of play, what happened? Maybe in a very small nutshell.
I feel like the entire first hour is just this exposition setting up who you are, what you're doing, who Area Man is, and then the fact that Area Man has carjacked Joel McHale's character. And so, they're using this other kidnapped character as like the foil against Area Man, because I feel like it would be a lot harder to get some of this expository information out if Area Man wasn't trying to explain to his kidnapping victim who he was and what he was trying to do. And one thing that I don't think that we mentioned is the experience uses the microphone. And so you can try to speak to people using the microphone on the quest, and it'll transcribe that in real time. And so that's not I guess the vast majority of the interaction between Taylor, the DJ, and Area Man is through playing records and playing these ads, but that's not like the only interaction mechanism. I think we also neglected to mention that this is a very small town. So there's only like 8 places for Area Man to go. And there's very helpfully what looks kind of like a weird map/murder board behind you.
Yes. Yeah. And I think so you can use that to kind of track it. And there's a magical little like purple dot that shows up on the map that kind of shows you where they currently are. So you can have a sense of perspective there. So I guess, Kathryn, did you reach an ending to this game?
No, my headset started to die just as we were getting through who Area Man was, why Area Man had this person's car, why Joel McHale's character was trying to get to the beach because he needed to be with his wife because they were supposed to be going camping. Yeah. And so I think the like first chapter, because it feels like a radio drama. It feels like it's supposed to be episodic, but it takes a really long time to set up all the pieces of the story that I didn't I got to maybe the first, hey, you should direct Area Man somewhere. Like that was the only interaction I had. He hadn't unfortunately perished yet.
Okay, so this is very interesting. So I've experienced not 1, not 2, but 3 different endings to this game so far. In regards to what's happening. And each of them, I would say, is still not the primary ending in regards to what happens, because I still never, I took different routes that actually, one of which took me the opposite direction of where Joe McHale's wife is having the baby on the beach. And what happens is the first time I went through it, basically I ended up taking Area Man and Joel McHale's character to the car shop. And of course, what happened is that the car mechanic starts to choke, And luckily, the area man is there to give the Heimlich maneuver and saves the day. And it's a wonderful experience. And there's a nice little report at the end. But of course, Ronan Farrow points out, unfortunately, there's a pregnant woman who was not rescued and has been chased by raccoons with blow dart guns, who are bizarrely really effective and have great aim with this. And hopefully something can happen to have that done. And then like the world spins and lights up, and then the clock, because there's a clock in the DJ's booth, you can kind of track the time, which does track minutes successfully, goes back in time. And then I get a quick recap of basically the first hour of the game again. And then I can then essentially prompt area man to go a different direction.
Are the characters aware of the time loop? Is your character's obviously aware of it because you're playing them, but like, is that built into the game, or is it just like
it appears
a mechanic?
Not to be? So there is a narrator who I believe is voiced by Linda Joy, who I think is delightful, and I think this is where the comic book element comes into it, is that the narrator seems to be omniscient and aware of what's going on, and it's implied that like the narrator is the one booting you back to the beginning of the sequence of events to try to do this again, to have a different experience. And so I would say I've played 6 hours of this game and I've had 3 endings, and I would still say I haven't had the primary ending. And I'm kind of, what I think is really cool, and I think a lot of the NoPro community would really like that have headsets, is the depth of world building and the opportunities that are available to just explore and have imagination in a very confined space. Because this is also, as we Kathryn hinted at, from Cyan, the publishers of Myst, and it does have this very kind of sprawling, like, the more you explore, even though you're in the same little room, I guess maybe the more you interact and the more decisions you make, the wider the world becomes around you and the more opportunities emerge to have different things occur.
And there's a lot of just stuff to explore. Like if you just want to stack the cassette tapes and play records, you can do that. There's stuffed animals and a book and a mug and like takeout containers and all sorts of other side characters who've kind of left their mark in the booth. So I had fun just kind of exploring the booth itself and trying to play records. Although I will say it was very difficult to get the records back into the sleeves after you've taken them out. And as a vinyl nerd, that was extremely disturbing to me. I was no!
You didn't do what you do in all VR games, and once you're done with the thing, just throw it on the floor?
Oh, no! And I think there's a record that doesn't even have a sleeve, and that was just like frustrating me so much.
Yeah, I think there's one that just sits on the desk at the start. I agree.
No!
And so I really enjoyed a lot of this, and the humor. There's the game's really funny. Like you have these, Joel McHale and Max Greenfield are hilarious. These are some really great vocal performances because they've been given some really funny material. And I think that's worth celebrating. I will say the downside on this game is that I've encountered the frustration in having 3 endings is that, you know, in Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray, it gets set up that he's stuck in the same day, and whether he goes to sleep or does something or dies or whatever, he gets booted back. The power of the movie in order to like just quickly cut and establish shots and repetition goes so quickly. We're here. I don't know whether they maybe expect people to not play this game like for several hours straight, or maybe to like return to it over a longer period of time sporadically. But then the recap, so you have an ending, you get kicked back to the beginning. And I would still say sometimes, depending on what decisions you made, you might cover 10 minutes of recap to try to get to a place to have a different decision. It does not go quick in regards to getting back into the thick of it, which is very frustrating.
It seems weird because we've had so much time loop media lately, from games to movies, and most of them just seem like, I think the Palm Springs movie just like assumes you know what's going on and just like launches into it.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about a little bit beforehand. I just played Deathloop, which has a looping mechanic, and it runs you through the same sequence like once, and then it's just like, all right, we're done with that. We're going to skip past it now because you know what's going on. And that does seem weird, just keep making people play through the same thing. Like that's not the meat of the experience.
There's no option to skip ahead or make it optional. It's like
so
forced
bizarre.
every time.
Yes. You can't even skip over dialogue. That like, so when you are in a challenge and Area Man dies, it boots you back just to right before he dies, right? So do the challenge again. See if you give it a second try to solve the puzzle again. But then you can't skip the setup. There was one that I was actually very confused on what I was supposed to do. It took me, when I got it, I'm like, oh, I see, this is obvious. But I had to hear that sequence of summation 3 times. Oh, we're stuck here. Oh, look out. Here's the thing. Oh, no. What are we going to do? He dies. Oh, we're stuck. Oh, what are we going to do? Oh, look out. He's going to die. Restart. Oh, he's stuck. What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to die. But it plays out, unfortunately, much longer in the game.
Right.
I mean, not to it's an unfortunate bummer of this game that the time loop mechanic, while clever and it allows actually a lot of depth in this game, to get back into the thick of it quickly is not easy. But I ultimately, I don't know. At this point, I like it. It's very choose your own adventure. It's very fun. It's goofy. It's original in what it's doing. So at the end of the day, right now, unless the final ending is going to be a letdown, it's a recommend for me. I think there's a lot worthwhile here to play.
It just seems like a fun game the way you're describing it too. Like seems cool, even if it's got a few flaws, and it's like, I mean, that happens with anything.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to jump on to the next one you two wanted to talk about, which is Lost Recipes by Schell Games.
Yeah, another Schell Games. We can't. I think we can't get enough of all the offerings from that game studio. So Lost Recipes is basically, the premise is you're just traveling back in time to learn and prepare culturally important recipes as taught to you by those with actual ancestry in the culture. And primarily this game focuses on Greek, Chinese, and Mayan history and culture. And whether it be that you're just learning to prepare the food using their time-honored traditions, or learning like fun historical information in regards to the context, this was just a delightfully fun game. Like, talk about something where it's like there's nothing happening with like, shooting or violence, or there's anything stressful going on.
You cannot die.
You can't die. You can poorly plate your dish. I plated a dish poorly and got bad stars. So basically, what happens is that you appear in one of the 3 kitchens, and there's everyone's community is like, are they chef ghosts? Is that the conceit? I don't know why they're ghosts, but they're ghosts because I guess you're traveling back in time, and you basically have to like go through the steps of actually cooking. Like, I guess on one hand, maybe for those of you who might not like cooking, this might sound like a nightmare, but I found it so delightful because what happens is you're like having to really focus on the act of cooking and take your time, which I thought was a kind of daring choice in a way in a VR game, is that like you have to wait for the water to get to the right temperature when you're boiling it, or the oil. Like, you can't rush through this game. You have to be mindful of what you're doing and how you're preparing food, which way you're cutting things, and how you are mixing things to get the right amount of like creating like a sourdough ball in order to scoop pieces and put it together. Like,
so
cooking
such a tactile experience, does it capture that at all? Because I just feel weird if you're like kind of like, if you don't have like the weight of the knife in your hand or the thing to press against, like how does it handle that?
So in regards to like the tactile nature, I would say that it's definitely not like it's not like I'm really having to maybe like press into something carefully, or like make sure I line it up perfectly straight to cut like a jalapeno from the top to bottom, in regards to it. But it does require you to really think and do things. Like, I feel like sometimes in a lot of VR games, you can just bungle your way through everything. Like, you just can't chop the onion, like to like get it diced. Like you have to like hold the onion and slice it. Or if you want to put some cinnamon on some fried dough that you've made, you've got to hold it together and make sure you're scraping it and you've got it lined up so it falls up. So it really is about being like cognizantly present, I would say, in regards to the tactile thing, that you just like, while you don't have the sensation, you understand the importance of what you're doing. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I or use like a VR thing, so I don't know how it would play out.
Sure.
But it's a lot more like, oh, this is the process of how you would make the dish. And
Yeah.
it's less
Okay.
about very precise technique, because when you have to add, say, liquid to something, I was like, I'm not really measuring here, but okay, a splash of this and it turns out okay. So I think they've also possibly chosen recipes
like
that are maybe a little more forgiving.
It's like the spirit of cooking rather than like the letter of cooking, I guess.
Yes, I think that's a great way to do, because like when it's like a splash of like wine, add a splash of wine to this recipe, you'll pour it in, but then it'll make a sound when like, oh, that's enough, like ding, like you've got it perfect, and it'll like shoot little stars out of whatever you're mixing in, like not like obnoxiously, but enough to like clue you into the fact that like, yeah, that is a splash compared to when maybe you need to dump 3 cupfuls of water into something. Like you do feel like you are dumping the water in longer rather than the splash of wine.
Okay.
What I found really nice is there's all these other cooking simulation games out there, and it's all about you're running a restaurant, you're Lucy in the Chocolate Factory, orders are coming in, stuff's not
Chop,
coming out
chop.
enough. Like, hurry
Yeah.
up, hurry up, hurry up. And this is like, we're going to walk you through how you make this classic dish and everything's fine. Let's be calm and soothe and like just like enjoy the process and the act of like picking things up and combining them, or stuff like roll something out and put it in the oven. Oh, you need to start the oven. Like, let's start a fire. So it didn't seem like you needed to be perfect, and it seemed also really hard to like mess up or fail.
Well,
Yeah.
that seems like more in line with like a home cook, right? Like it's like you're not running a restaurant, or you're making something for yourself. Like the process itself can be enjoyable, from like picking the food out to the cleaning to the cutting to the cooking. That sounds interesting. I'm into this.
Yeah. And I
It's
think
really
the other,
cool.
yeah. And the other strength of it is that, the chefs that are teaching you or help giving you instruction, while maybe there's some downtime while you're like waiting for like the water to boil when you're in the Greek kitchen, the chef will be like, oh, look out the window, and you look out the window and there is the Acropolis is up in the distance and you can see it, and then you get some interesting tidbits and pieces of information. I thought the Chinese and the Mayan kitchens were full of like constantly fascinating pieces of information that while you're maybe doing some chopping or you're preparing food in a very particular kitchen utensil, like you're in a wok or on a specialized piece of cooking utensil.
Yeah, they
tell
they
I do a
they
lot of
like
cooking.
explain the equipment that you need to
Mhm.
use to make the specific dish, and it might be like equipment that's specific to this culture in this moment in time. And they did a ton of research for the educational stuff because they wanted to make sure it was representative and it was authentic. So if you look at the credits, there's like 8 like college professors who are credited for being these cultural consultants to make sure that things were accurate and they were respectful in their depictions.
And do they like provide the recipes if you wanted to try and make some of these on your own in the real world
I
after?
believe they do, because I saw a lot of things on the website that like if you go through the credits or it's at some point in it, they talk about like you can see more recipes and things like that. Um, but in many ways, I think that's the genius of it. To your point, Kevin, is that the steps are straightforward. Like while they're like, oh, like, a splash of whatever, things like that. Like they're like, oh, just one pepper or one things like that. Like I haven't looked at, and I suppose we could do that right here, right now, is that my mind would be blown if you couldn't find these recipes on the the Lost Recipes website right now. I presume one of you is furiously
I am.
Googling
I'm
it.
scrolling. I'm scrolling. There,
So,
yeah,
and
there. I think
okay.
there is a book. Oh wow, yeah. So, cook at home. Do you want to recreate the recipes in your own kitchen? Enjoy this recipe book containing all of the in-game recipes
Oh,
written for the modern cook and kitchen. And
how
I
fun!
think it's a free PDF if you just scroll down on the website. How wonderful!
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm I'm just gonna play this game
in
without
real
playing the
life.
game.
In
Yeah.
in reality,
Yeah.
not
Who
virtual
needs a
reality.
headset?
I mean, we could like have you put goggles on, Kevin, just to like simulate the weight of it as you're cooking. I mean,
Put some
that's
weird
like a
things
good
on their
chopping onion
hands.
trick anyway, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. I've never found a good chopping onions trick.
I heard you're supposed to put bread in your mouth. Don't
I've
quote
heard
me
that
on
one
that.
too.
Hmm.
I can't. I'm trying to figure out if I've tried that one. I feel like I've tried a few just because it's like, is this actually gonna work? And sometimes it works for like a second. And you're like, nope. There.
Yeah. The
Not
only
worth a try.
problem with this game is don't play when you're hungry.
Mm,
Because you're like,
Eh,
oh, that looks real good. What do I have? Oh, leftovers.
yeah, leftover nonsense. And I would say like the one negative that is probably super obvious to everyone, and it is, but like the lack of smell is very much missing in this game. But I think they did do a really wonderful job in Lost Recipes of like sounds and like really kind of like the texture of what you're cooking and you're making. They put a lot of effort into that detail. And while I think the loss of the smell of what you're doing, I mean, they could never capture it, but I think they really did make a good faith effort to make up for that, because I would say everything looked great. And when you finally have your recipe completed and you've completed the dish, it looks good. It looks really like well rendered and really engaging.
all right. So everyone check that one out. I'm excited about that one. It's just really cook. It seems fun. This is what I didn't expect to be like that.
There
Into
you
that
go.
game.
That's the game that gets you to go out and buy a
Yeah.
quest.
the cooking game. Yeah, that's on brand for me. So now we're gonna throw to Kathryn for Unbinary.
Yeah, so Unbinary is by a company called Ludact. It is a VR puzzle adventure game and is entirely hand painted in quill. And so it's got this very distinctive look and feel. And you kind of get thrust into what is supposed to be, I guess, an intelligence simulation. You're referred to as the autonomous user. So you're a human and you're interacting with this AI called Webby, who's Webby's kind of over it. Webby's like, okay, here's this human, and I have to put them through like this series of trials because you're being tested for something. And Webby is an AI made of data collected from human behavior and etc. So you, the human, are interacting with Webby, and then there's this other more system-driven AI, and as you complete the tasks, the system driven AI is saying that you are bad. You're not good at this. And you're like, but I just solved the puzzle. I did the task. And Webby's getting frustrated. And you start to understand a little bit more about who you are in this world, who Webby is in this world. There's also these other robots who react to you dependent upon what you appear to be to them. And so you've got a couple different masks that you literally take off and put on. And when you put, say, the green one on, the other green robots, now that you look like them, are friendly to you and they appear fooled. But then if you encounter like a yellow robot while wearing the green mask, the yellow robot is like angry and like pushes you. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on as you're in this like, oh, I am a human in this simulation and I'm being given these intelligence tests. And then the intelligence tests are kind of like the in-world rationale as to why you need to move boxes around, you need to figure out how to open doors, you're looking for keys, you're trying to figure out how to get to like inaccessible areas. So I thought that the puzzle mechanics were just really nicely done. Reminded me a lot of various types of escape rooms in terms of, you're doing these like tactile mechanical things. One thing that I thought was really interesting is that there is a climbing mechanic. Uh,
Oh,
Side note that
really?
yeah, like if you get motion sick, turn on the vignetting because they've got mechanics similar to like the ladder Invader Immortal. But, like you're on level 1 and you look up and there's something like way high above you and you're like, oh, I need to get up there to open the switch that'll open this other door so I can get the key and then bring it back down here to unlock myself from this room. And so when you're in the yellow mask, like that's when they ask you to climb and like move platform boxes around. And oh, now that I've moved the box around, like I can actually like go on top of the box where I couldn't before. So I felt like there was a lot of similarity to 2D and 3D puzzle games just because they were harkening back to a lot of those same mechanics, but with this
Mm-hmm.
special VR twist because you've got the mask thing going on and you're able to climb and move around in these various environments. And the hand painted style is really beautiful. Like it really feels like you're inside some sort of animated world or comic book world. I think the only thing that I would note is it's not always obvious what's interactable. So you might find random objects lying around this kind of laboratory or factory like environment and think, oh, here's like a sledgehammer. I'm supposed to pick this up and interact. And then like your hand goes right through it and you're like, oh, this is just for show. But everything
Yeah.
has the exact same appearance. So in an escape room, you might be like, oh, I'm supposed to move this bookcase or whatever. And it's like nailed down, right? So you end up the same problem in VR. Oh, whatever this cartridge is this part of the puzzle? Oh, it's not. My hand goes right through it. So,
Well,
yeah.
I had similar. It's funny you mentioned that because there was a game that I reviewed, The Secret of Retroopolis, which is available on the MetaQuest as well, and it too was done in Quill. And like, God, there's just something so beautiful and like just engrossing when the entirety of some of these games or VR games are done in Quill. It like just adds such character and depth, like compared to when you're just like, I'm just walking around some metal hallway or whatever, right? Like to think that someone like hand drew all of these details just really adds a lot. But there was a puzzle in The Secret of Retroopolis where, because the entire world was just so gorgeous, it was almost overwhelming in a sense because I'm like, there's just things I would never have occurred. It would never have
Mhm.
occurred to me to interact with because I just thought they were beautiful background pieces. So it's interesting that you kind of had the reverse problem where you're like, oh, I can touch and do everything, but I really don't need it. And it's like, maybe that's an interesting like issue with Quill in regards to like, what are you going to place importance on for interactivity and interaction with your players? Because I feel like Quill, you're just like either just lost in it or you do want to just touch and grab everything. But maybe that's not a good idea.
Well, I think in VR games, we are trained to try to touch and grab everything. And I at least personally feel a little bit more satisfied if my hand just kind of hits the surface or bounces off. And I'm like, okay,
Yes.
well, someone at least went to the trouble of being like, this is solid, but it's not, yeah, like you're not supposed to interact with it. It's not for you. And I think that's just kind of like a classic video game problem. What's interactable, right? So different games solve this in different ways by adding a glow or an aura or having it blink or having some sort of like visual indicator or like thing pointing at it directly.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they are still making updates to the game, patches, bug fixes. They recently fixed a bunch of locomotion bugs and they added, I think, faster smooth turning for people that wanted it. So this is probably something that they are cognizant of. I know that, at least from my perspective, the environments were sparse enough that it did become immediately evident that the 6 things that I thought were part of the puzzle were actually background and set pieces. So at
Okay.
least they had that going for it. It is interesting to think of something that's like more of a austere, sterile environment because it does look like a spaceship or a submarine. The long corridor, and you're like, oh, but this is painted so it feels more organic. So think of like some of the environments in like Portal, but someone
Mm-hmm.
went to the trouble of like sci-fi door hand painted, and so the line is not exactly straight and the edges maybe don't exactly meet, the width is not always consistent. So that contrast to me just seemed really, really compelling. Plus, you've got this like very mysterious, who am I? Why am I here? Why does this AI care? Why is this AI putting me through these intelligence tests, you know?
No, absolutely. Did you finish it, or are you still working your way through some of it? I mean, like, do you have a sense of like? I guess ultimately, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to ask is this a Kathryn approved game? Is this gonna make the NoPro list of recommendations for VR experiences?
I'm still trying to figure out maybe, you know, where they might be going with it, just because
Mm-hmm.
this right now the story is so sketchy, right? They've teased a lot of things, but they haven't done any reveals. But for me, I think just from a tactile, physical, like embodied perspective, I'm really enjoying being in the world. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of like the specific performance of Webby, the annoyed AI thus far. She's like a little bit too British and annoyed for me. So I think that could just be like a personal preference thing. But I feel like
No,
this has like a lot of promise.
No, I think especially in VR, you need someone who is cheering you on, or is you have like an empathetic or sympathetic relationship with. I think that was a strength in regards to Area Man Lives, is that the sound engineer, the further you go on certain paths, you learn more about kind of maybe his longing to have a family, and that there's a single mother with a child who he actually really gets along with, but then of course the mother's in a relationship with a different DJ, like the morning DJ, and while you're struggling to help all these people, like he's just being open and honest. And I feel like we've also seen that like with Vader Immortal, where like you could have like, sure, you can have like quirky characters, Maya Rudolph as the droid in there helping you out, but ultimately like the Maya Rudolph wants you to get out, wants to help you. And I think it's a very hard line to walk in the VR space.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think misplaced humor, or just like, hey, this character just seems annoyed all the time, and I, the VR player, just got here, so maybe be a little less annoyed robot. I don't know.
Yeah, because you're like making eye contact. Like like I think that's like the difference between video game and VR game, is that like a lot of these games you have in a normal console or computer game, you're back from it. Like you're maybe looking over the shoulder, or like you're looking on a screen, and you got to like kind of like line up your characters, so even if it's in first person, you're quote making eye contact. Where in VR you can like really like turn and like sometimes get up into the face of some of these characters or some of these people. And I feel like the sense of space and dynamic comes into play, right? Like if someone's a little further back and maybe being snarky, that's one thing. But when they're like maybe up in your face, which I don't know what that's happening in this game, but that makes a difference. Like, whoa, like, hey, like give me like just like a foot of space here if you don't mind.
Yeah, you don't actually see Webby, but when some of the robots make it clear they don't like you, they actually come up to you and like push you back. And that
Mm-hmm.
definitely that startled me, because I was like, wait, I'm embodied in this game, and I've come up against a robot who doesn't like me or what I'm doing. And you get pushed back like in the actual environment, even though your body doesn't move. So that was like a really interesting design choice, I think.
All right. So, all right, Patrick kind of mentioned it. Are any of these going to make our Oculus Quest must plays, which we'll plug in the show notes too?
To be determined. I think
Yeah,
we got to go back in, because there's a lot of good stuff on there like that. The bar is quite high.
that's true. I mean, like and as like I'm enjoying like how so many of these games are trying something new and things like that. Like, but there are things on our list like a room, a VR puzzler. There's Vader Immortal. There's the Under Percents, which is of course a big favorite here. But then we also have things like Dr. Crumb's School for Disobedient Pets, and the mini golf tour. Like, there's a lot of really great experiences that I think they're already out there that, for better or worse, whether maybe they were first in the space or they've just had more time to like get everything figured out. I don't know, but I do feel like all of these are like worthwhile contenders, and or like, oh, like you like this thing, you're going to love Area Man Lives and things and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because people are walking into like their local Target and buying a quest all the time, and the question we often get is, what should I try if I'm not a fan of action combat games? So we do have some action and combat games in the list, but we do try to think about the breadth and depth of the catalog for the MetaQuest, and then try to highlight, what's the must try for someone who's just getting their feet wet. So it it's a it's a good challenge to have, I would say.
It's a good challenge. All right, so yeah, you can check that out on the site. We'll put it in the show notes if you haven't looked at that already. And now we're gonna wrap up. So as always, thank you both for coming on to talk about the VR stuff. And
Of course.
NoPro is a labor of love. Everyone on staff who you hear on podcasts and read on the site are volunteers. You can support this work by donating to 0% and Patreon. Even $2 or $5 a month helps. And if you're enjoying Review Crew or the main NoPro podcast, you can also support us by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So for the Review Crew, signing off. Thanks, everybody.